I was just trying to mow my lawn before the summer heat kicked in, but next thing I knew, 2 police officers were knocking on my door because my neighbor Karen called 911 on me. That morning, I decided I wasn't just going to mow my lawn, I was going to mow down her peace and quiet. Asterisk, I had always been an early riser. But that particular morning, it wasn't just habit, it was survival. The weather forecast promised another brutal July day with highs over 100 degrees. And with my night shifts at the hospital, my only window for mowing the lawn was early morning. I wasn't trying to be inconsiderate. In fact, I went out of my way to make sure I wasn't being loud. I used a battery-powered mower which barely made more noise than a kitchen blender, and I wore wireless earbuds to stay focused. It was just past 6 a.m. when I started gray light barely creeping over the rooftops. The neighborhood still tucked in its sleepy silence. As I pushed the mower across the damp grass, I felt that familiar sense of calm that comes with repetitive motion. I was lost in the quiet rhythm of things back and forth, line by line. For someone who spent his nights dealing with frantic emergency room patients, this kind of solitude was sacred. The scent of fresh-cut grass filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. That peace shattered about 15 minutes in. I spotted flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the windows of the houses down the street. At first I thought there must have been an accident or some kind of emergency until the cruiser slowed down and stopped directly in front of my driveway. My heart jumped, and I instinctively shut off the mower. 2 uniformed police officers stepped out, adjusting their belts as they approached me. "Good morning, sir," one of them said with a neutral tone, though I could see a hint of amusement on his face. "We got a call about a disturbance at this address." "A disturbance?" I repeated, confused. "I'm just mowing my lawn." "That's what we figured," the second officer added, glancing at the quiet machine beside me. "Your neighbor, 2 doors down, called 911, said you were waking up the neighborhood." My jaw nearly dropped. 911. Not a noise complaint to the HOA, not a quick text or door knock. She had called emergency services. I rubbed my temples, trying to contain my disbelief. "I'm not even using a gas mower," I said. "It's electric. Super quiet." I figured it wouldn't bother anyone. Both officers nodded, clearly aware that this wasn't a high-priority call. Still, one of them gently advised, "We're not issuing any citations, but maybe try to wait until 7 a.m. next time. You know, just to keep the peace." I thanked them for their time, apologized for the trouble, and watched them leave. But as I rolled my mower back into the garage, my mood darkened. I couldn't help but glance toward the house 2 doors down, white siding, neatly trimmed hedges, and a porch swing that hadn't moved in months. I had never officially met the owner, but I knew the rumors. Her name was Karen, and she had a reputation. Apparently Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was the self-appointed guardian of suburban order. The kind of person who kept a binder of HOA bylaws on her nightstand and had the police on speed dial. The kind of person who smiled when your packages arrived late, who peered through curtains when your dog barked too long, who reported the tiniest violations just to feel a sense of control. I had heard about her from other neighbors. She once left an angry note on someone's car for parking too close to her curb. Another time she threatened to call the city over someone's Halloween decorations being up too long. No one liked confrontation, so most people just stayed quiet and kept their heads down, but I wasn't most people. I didn't want to fight, but I also wasn't going to be bullied by someone who thought calling 911 was an appropriate reaction to a man mowing his lawn. I went inside, poured myself a strong coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table, still in my grass-stained sneakers. Fuming, she hadn't just reported me, she had tried to punish me for existing in a way she didn't like. And that didn't sit right. Later that day I reviewed the HOA handbook to double-check any rules on noise ordinances. Just as I suspected, there were no official restrictions on lawn work other than the citywide no excessive noise before 7 a.m. guideline. I was in a gray area, technically not breaking any rules, especially with how quiet my mower was. But Karen didn't care about technically, she cared about power. The more I thought about it, the more annoyed I got. It wasn't just that she called the police, it was how quickly she did it. No warning, no conversation, no attempt at basic neighborly decency. She hadn't even tried to be human. She just picked up the phone and used the full weight of law enforcement to send me a message. "I run this block." But if Karen thought I was going to back down, she didn't know me at all. For the rest of that week I paid close attention to her schedule. I started noticing when she came and went, when her porch light turned on, when her car left the driveway. She worked some kind of part-time job, maybe in real estate or admin, but always stayed home on Wednesdays and Sundays. Those were her sleeping days. I'd see her lights come on late, and she wouldn't get her mail until almost noon. She liked her silence. She liked her control, and I had just discovered the one thing she valued, more than rules, her morning peace. It was Thursday when my plan started forming. Trash day. Every Monday and Thursday morning around 6:15 a.m., the garbage truck rolled through our street. The driver was usually pretty quiet, one honk, quick pickup, and done. But I started thinking, what if I gave that truck a reason to linger a little longer near Karen's house? That same evening, I walked out as the sanitation crew was finishing the route and waved down the driver. His name was Mike, friendly guy, probably mid-40s with a quick smile and a Bluetooth headset in his ear. I thanked him for his hard work and asked, "Hey, any chance you could give an extra honk or two when you swing by 2 doors down?" He laughed. "Karen's place," I raised my eyebrows. "So you know her?" "Everyone on this route knows her," he said with a chuckle. "She once called my supervisor to complain that the lift arm on the truck sounded too industrial." Can you believe that? I couldn't help but laugh. "Yeah, that tracks." Mike winked. "Tell you what, I'll give her the deluxe wake-up special. Couple extra clanks and a long honk. No rules against that." I shook his hand and thanked him, already feeling lighter. It wasn't revenge. It was education. Just a little reminder that respect works both ways. She didn't own the peace and quiet. We all shared this space. Back at home, I prepped an extra trash bin I had stored in the shed. I filled it with heavy yard clippings, broken branches, and an old folding chair. Then I placed it right at the edge of my property, closer to her side. Still legal, still mine, but close enough that Mike would have to work the lift right by her bedroom window. That night, I went to bed with a strange mix of guilt and anticipation. I didn't want to be that Geetha petty neighbor, but then again, I wasn't the one who called 911 over a lawnmower the next morning. I sat by the kitchen window, coffee in hand, as the sun began to rise. Right on time, the garbage truck rounded the corner and stopped in front of my house. Mike gave a friendly wave, then leaned on the horn twice as he crushed the first bin. Metal clanged, gears groaned, and the backup beeper chirped loudly as he shifted position. I watched Karen's curtains flutter. A shadow moved behind them. A moment later, her porch light snapped on. I smiled. Trash day had a new meaning now, and it was only just beginning. The following Monday arrived with the same gentle blue haze at dawn, dew glistening on the sidewalks, and birds chirping above the rows of identical suburban homes. But something was different this time, not just for me, but for Karen. I had waited all weekend, wondering if she would react, and when that trash truck rolled through again with an extra honk and clattering pickup right in front of her house, I saw it. Her blinds shifted violently, and a pale, furious face peeked out. From behind them, I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just sipped my coffee and let the metal crush of garbage lids and the screech of hydraulic arms do all the talking. For someone so obsessed with control, Karen now had an alarm clock she couldn't silence, and I hadn't even touched her property or spoken a word to her. It was beautiful, but I knew Karen wouldn't stay quiet for long. 2 days later, a thick white envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, no postage, just a neatly folded note with a copy of the HOA rules tucked inside. The top page had a single highlighted section. Residents are expected to refrain from any activities that create excessive disturbances or disrupt the peace of the community. And underneath, a note written in rigid cursive: "Consider this your final warning. HOA involvement will escalate if the early morning disruptions continue. Some of us value our rest." A concerned neighbor, I chuckled as I read it. She really thought a passive-aggressive note disguised as anonymous concern was going to intimidate me. Classic Karen. What she didn't realize was I had already anticipated this move. I went back into the house, grabbed the HOA binder I'd downloaded from the community portal, and flipped to the same section she had quoted. Sure enough, the clause she highlighted was vague and buried under a dozen other entries, none of which were enforceable unless paired with multiple written complaints. So I made a few calls, spoke to 2 neighbors I'd gotten to know: Tom across the street and Melissa on the corner. Tom, a retired Navy vet, loved waking up early. He said he'd be happy to back me up if the HOA tried anything. Melissa just rolled her eyes and said, "Karen's going to be the reason I move one day," and offered to sign a statement saying she'd never been disturbed by my mowing, trash bins, or anything else. I wasn't just covering my bases, I was building a wall. The very next day, Karen decided to up the ante. I was pulling into my driveway after a long night shift when I noticed a clipboard-toting woman walking toward my front porch. She had short, perfectly styled hair, a floral blouse, and a purse that looked like it hadn't been touched by dust or dirt in its entire life. She introduced herself as Sheila, one of the HOA board members. "Good morning," she said politely. Though there was a tightness behind her smile, I just wanted to drop by for a quick chat. A neighbor recently brought up concerns about repeated early morning noise near this property. I raised my eyebrows, pretending to be surprised. "Oh, was something going on?" She paused. "Well, they mentioned lawn mowing very early, around 6 in the morning, and loud trash-related activities happening unusually close to the neighbor's home." I looked over at Karen's place. Sure enough, her curtains were parted an inch, and her eyes were locked right on us. I resisted the urge to wave. "Sheila," I said calmly, "I work overnight at the hospital. I only get certain hours to do my lawn work, but I always make sure I'm not violating city noise ordinances. As for trash day, the city handles pickup, not me. I'm just a guy putting out bins like everyone else." Sheila nodded, flipping through her clipboard as if trying to find a reason to argue. "Technically, you're not in violation, but we do try to keep neighborly relations smooth." I smiled. "Oh, I completely agree. In fact, I haven't spoken to my neighbor directly, but I'd be happy to clear things up face to face. Sheila's face twitched, just for a second. I don't believe that'll be necessary. Of course not. Karen didn't want a conversation. She wanted compliance. After Sheila left, I took a slow walk down the street. I noticed something interesting. Karen had recently installed a doorbell camera. Not a cheap one, either top-of-a-line motion tracking night vision. She had gone full surveillance mode. I imagined her, sitting on the couch with her phone in hand, getting pinged every time a squirrel crossed her porch. It would have been funny if it wasn't so deeply sad. That same night, I had an idea, simple, legal, but also. I pulled out my Bluetooth speaker, charged it up, and the next morning at exactly 6:10 a.m., I placed it on the edge of my driveway facing her house. I played birdsong and wind chimes, nothing abrasive, nothing aggressive, but I made sure it was just loud enough to catch her attention. About 15 minutes later, her curtains jerked open. I turned off the speaker and waved. She quickly pulled them shut again. It was the start of something bigger. I wasn't trying to break high, wasn't cruel, but I was determined to hold my ground. She had weaponized the HOA, the police, and now subtle intimidation tactics. I wasn't going to let her win just because she had too much time and too little empathy. By the weekend, I had fully mapped out her schedule. Karen woke up late on her days off, usually didn't leave the house unless it was for groceries or something HOA related, and she watered her plants every Wednesday morning while glaring at whoever walked past her driveway. Her obsession with rules wasn't just about order, it was about power. She needed to feel in control, and the fact that I wasn't scared of her made me a threat, so I leaned in. Every trash day, I kept the routine the same. 2 bins, one heavier than the other, placed carefully near the edge of my property close to hers. Mike and his crew stayed loyal to the cause. Double honks, slow pickups, and a cheerful "have a great morning" shouted across the lawn. I always smiled, waved, and thanked them loudly enough for Karen to hear. Not sarcastic, not mocking, just unmistakably cheerful. One morning, as I was collecting my empty bins, I found another note taped to the side of one. This time, it was shorter. "This is harassment. You will regret continuing this behavior." No signature. Same neat cursive. Karen was losing patience. That Sunday, something unexpected happened. Melissa, the corner neighbor, knocked on my door holding a Tupperware of brownies. "I figured you could use a pick-me-up," she said with a smirk. "Karen left one of her anonymous flyers in my mailbox yesterday, tried to get me to sign a petition about your anti-community behavior. Thought you'd want to know." I burst out laughing. "Did she actually get anyone to sign?" "Please," Melissa scoffed. "Nobody takes her seriously. She once filed a complaint because someone's garden gnome was facing the street. A gnome, for crying out loud." Thanked her for the heads up and the brownies. It was clear Karen wasn't just trying to control me. She was trying to build a coalition. Turned the whole neighborhood against me like I was some kind of lawn terrorist, but it wasn't working. In fact, the opposite was happening. The more people saw her behavior, the more they quietly took my side. Tom started mowing his lawn at 6:45 just to show support. Melissa kept parking her car 1 inch closer to Karen's curb. The neighborhood didn't want a war, but they were tired of walking on eggshells. I had just given them a reason to stop. Karen, on the other hand, was doubling down, and from the twitching of her curtains every morning, I knew one thing for sure: trash day had become her worst nightmare. By the time the 3rd week rolled around, Karen was unraveling, and I could see it in the smallest of ways. Her once pristine rose bushes at the front of her house were now overgrown and untended. The porch lights stayed on through the afternoon, and on one particularly revealing morning, she shuffled outside to get her mail wearing slippers that didn't match. For a woman so obsessed with order, it was the suburban equivalent of a public meltdown. I wasn't trying to drive her insane, at least, not at first. But something about her obsession with control made it impossible to look the other way. Most neighbors had spent years walking on eggshells around her, careful not to offend her strict idea of what the neighborhood should look and sound like. But she crossed a line the day she called 911 on me for mowing my own lawn. That wasn't just petty, that was dangerous still. I knew I needed to stay within the bounds of reason. No vandalism, no yelling matches, no trespassing. If I stooped to her level, she'd win. That's how people like her operated. They provoked, then played victim when someone fought back. I had to keep my cool and let the natural consequences of her own paranoia do the work, and war how they did. Monday morning arrived like clockwork, and so did Mike and the sanitation crew. They gave their now customary pair of honks, each one sharp and jarring in the still air. I watched from my living room window as Karen flew out of her front door with a phone in hand, robe whipping in the breeze like she was about to lead a protest. I couldn't hear what she was yelling, but Mike just gave a polite nod, pointed at the city logo on the side of the truck, and drove off like he had just been told the weather forecast. She stood in her yard for a good 30 seconds afterward, fuming, her face red and her fists clenched. When she finally stormed back inside, I knew this wasn't over, and I was right. 2 days later I got a formal letter in the mail. Not a Karen's Anonymous note. This one was from the HOA board itself, typed and sealed with their official stamp. Inside was a notice of a community conduct review meeting scheduled for Friday evening at the clubhouse. It stated that I was being invited, not required, but invited to discuss several complaints lodged about early morning nuisance behaviors. The phrasing was clever. It didn't accuse me of breaking any rules directly. It danced around the issue, using words like concerns, disruptions, and escalating neighbor conflicts. But I saw through it immediately. Karen had gone straight to the top, hoping to finally win around. She knew the police wouldn't help her. She knew her neighbors weren't backing her. The HOA was her last card to play. I decided to show up that Friday. I walked into the clubhouse 5 minutes early, wearing clean jeans, a tucked-in button-up, and carrying a printed folder full of notes and screenshots, my own quiet arsenal. Inside, Sheila and 2 other board members sat at a long table with bottled water and notepads and anxious smiles. A few other residents sat quietly in the back, watching like it was a courtroom drama. Karen sat in the front row. Her expression was smug and expectant, like she'd already won. She wore a pressed navy blouse and pearls, the suburban uniform of someone who believed rules were weapons. She didn't even look at me as I walked in. Sheila started with pleasantries, then read a brief statement about maintaining peaceful community standards. She mentioned recent complaints from concerned residents and asked if I would be willing to work toward a solution. That's when Karen stood up without being asked. "I would like to speak first," she announced, ignoring the confused look from the board. Sheila hesitated, then gave her a nod. Karen turned to face the room like she was addressing a courtroom. "This individual," she began, jabbing a finger in my direction without even saying my name, "has created an intolerable environment in our neighborhood. I have endured weeks of disruptive noise before sunrise, deliberate placement of trash bins near my property line, and even bizarre public audio displays designed to harass me," she continued, her voice rising. "It's not just me. Several others have expressed discomfort with his behavior. This is targeted, it's harassment, and if this board doesn't do something about it, I will take legal action." She finished with a dramatic pause, then sat down like a lawyer resting her case. Sheila turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" I stood slowly, opened my folder, and pulled out a printed page. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the city ordinance on noise. It states that residential noise restrictions begin at 10 p.m. and end at 7 a.m. I have not violated that once. In fact, I've adjusted my routine to start mowing after 7 since the first complaint. Even though I work night shifts and my only free time is in the early mornings." I placed the paper on the table. "This," I said, holding up another page, "is a screenshot from my home security footage, showing the trash truck arriving at 6:15 a.m. standard pickup time for our neighborhood. My bins are placed well within the legal boundaries of my property. I've never blocked a driveway or crossed the line." Another sheet on the table. "And this," I continued, holding up a third paper, "is a signed statement from Tom Harris and Melissa Grant, who are the residents on this block, confirming they've had no issue with my behavior and have not been disturbed by any of the supposed nuisance activities." I laid it beside the others, then looked up at the board calmly. "I haven't harassed anyone. I haven't broken any rules. All I've done is refuse to be intimidated by a neighbor who believes she has the authority to control how everyone else lives their lives." There was silence. Not angry silence, thoughtful silence. Sheila cleared her throat and said, "Thank you, that's very helpful documentation." Karen started to speak again, but Sheila raised a hand. "Let's allow the board to deliberate. We'll reach out to both parties next week." Karen's jaw tightened. She stood up and marched out of the room without another word. After the meeting, Tom caught up with me in the parking lot. "You handled that well," he said, patting me on the shoulder. "She's been pulling this stuff for years. Glad someone finally stood up to her." "I appreciate that," I replied. "I just wanted peace and quiet like everyone else." "Funny," he smirked. "That's the one thing she'll never get now." We both laughed. The following Monday, trash day, rolled around again. This time I stood on my lawn with my coffee in hand as the truck came by. Mike gave a long, joyful honk, and I waved. Karen's curtains didn't even move. Whether she was hiding or had finally accepted defeat, I didn't know, but it didn't matter, because the message had already been sent. The letter arrived on Thursday afternoon, tucked neatly into my mailbox with the HOAS logo at the top and a new air of finality about it. I'd been expecting it ever since the community meeting the previous week, but I still felt a small twist of anticipation in my stomach as I opened it. After all the drama, complaints, and passive-aggressive warfare, the decision was now in writing. After reviewing the presented materials, interviewing neighbors, and considering all submitted documentation, the HOA has determined that no official violations of community guidelines have occurred. We appreciate your cooperation and continued commitment to neighborhood standards. That was it. No threats, no demands, no warnings, just a clean, official acknowledgement that I had done nothing wrong. I sat on the porch that evening, letting the cool summer air wash over me. It had been a long few weeks, longer than it needed to be really, and it all began because I dared to mow my lawn a little early. The absurdity of it all made me chuckle. And yet, deep down I knew it wasn't really about the mowing. It was about Karen, about her need to control everything around her and punish anyone who didn't fit neatly into her version of how things should be. But now, the tide had turned. She had made a play, and she'd lost. The HOA board, the neighbors, the police, they were all done entertaining her tantrums. What came next was anyone's guess. That next Monday morning trash day, a guy and I walked out with my bins as usual, casually pushing them to the curb. Mike gave me a thumbs up as he pulled in, the early morning light catching the side of the truck as it rolled in slow and loud like a mechanical beast. He gave 2 cheerful honks, picked up the bins, and crushed them with the usual dramatic groans of hydraulics. This time, Karen didn't even twitch her curtains. I had to admit I missed the drama a little. Later that day I spotted something unusual. A white sedan I hadn't seen before was parked outside Karen's house, and a sharply dressed man in slacks and a short-sleeved button-up stood at her front door holding a clipboard. A real clipboard, not Karen's decorative neighborhood patrol kind. They stood on her porch talking for nearly 20 minutes. I couldn't hear anything from my spot on the porch, but I could tell from Karen's body language that it wasn't a friendly conversation. She was shifting her weight from foot to foot, arms crossed tightly, head tilted with defensiveness. A city official, an HOA auditor, code enforcement. I didn't know, but I filed it away mentally. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going her way. As it turned out, Karen's tantrum at the HOA meeting had consequences. Melissa came by later that evening to fill me in. Apparently, Karen had been reminded that HOA board meetings were not for personal grievances, and after her dramatic walkout, Sheila and the other board members decided to look into her behavior more closely. According to Melissa, several past complaints one's neighbors had filed quietly but never followed up on were now being re-reviewed. Karen had drawn too much attention to herself, and in doing so, she'd opened the floodgates. Tom from across the street filed a formal grievance about the camera Karen had installed that appeared to point directly at his front yard. Melissa reported an instance where Karen had sent her a photo of her dog off-leash in her own backyard, her fenced backyard, no less. Another family submitted a log of 6 different times Karen had placed friendly reminders on their door about landscaping and parking, even though none of the things she complained about were actual violations. The HOA board, now forced to do some damage control, had opened an internal inquiry into Karen's history as a resident, and suddenly, I wasn't the target anymore. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat, I didn't poke the bear. I went about my business as usual, keeping my lawn tidy, my bins neat, and my interactions friendly. The most satisfying revenge wasn't retaliation, was living well in spite of her efforts. But Karen, predictably, wasn't taking her fall from grace quietly. One morning, about 2 weeks later, I saw her pacing up and down her driveway with a phone to her ear, clearly mid-rant. She glanced in my direction once, then turned her back quickly. Something had changed. The confidence was gone. She no longer strutted down the sidewalk like she owned it. She no longer scowled at passing cars or directed glares at barking dogs. She had withdrawn, her power stripped by nothing more than her own overreach. Later that week, a for sale sign went up in her front yard. I blinked, almost not believing it at first. It was their white post, red lettering, and a little flyer box already stuffed with brochures. Karen's fortress of suburban fury was on the market. Melissa texted me about 5 minutes after I noticed. Guess who's finally moving? Looks like the queen has abdicated her throne. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. A few days later, as she was hauling boxes to the porch, I finally walked over. I didn't go to rub it in, I'm not that kind of person. But after everything, I felt like we needed to end this one way or another. She didn't look up right away when I stopped at the bottom of her steps. She was bent over, trying to tape the bottom of a moving box. I heard you're moving, I said casually. She stood slowly, brushing her hair behind her ears. Her expression was tired, not just physically tired, but soul-deep tired. Yep, she said flatly. I need a quieter community. I nodded. Fair enough. She crossed her arms, looked at me for a long moment, then said something I didn't expect. I wasn't always like this. You know, my husband died last year. Heart attack. Fast, I guess. I threw myself into things. The HOA, the house, the neighborhood, to stay busy. I didn't know what to say at first. I wasn't prepared for real vulnerability. But something in her tone made me pause. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I didn't know. She shrugged. It doesn't excuse how I acted. I thought if I could keep everything perfect, I wouldn't have to face how messy things got. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was close enough. I hope your next place brings you peace, I said honestly. She nodded. I think it will. I turned and walked away. That was the last time I spoke to Karen. 2 weeks later, her house sold, and just like that, the woman who once patrolled our street like a suburban sheriff was gone. The mood in the neighborhood lifted almost instantly. People started chatting more. Kids played in the yards without worried glances over their shoulders. Melissa hosted a casual barbecue in her backyard, and everyone actually showed up. Something that hadn't happened in years. The invisible fog that had lingered over our block had finally cleared. Mike still gave a cheerful honk on trash day, even though the early bin placement was no longer necessary. It had become something of a neighborhood inside joke. I was strange, a little symbol of victory. And me. One kept mowing my lawn early after 7 a.m. of course. Just a man with a quiet mower, a clean yard, and a peaceful morning. Funny how it all started with a single phone call, a Karen, a 911 dispatcher, a few honks, and some trash cans. And in the end, the real garbage took itself out. It had been 3 quiet weeks since Karen's moving truck rumbled down our street for the last time, taking with it her boxes, her binoculars, and a legacy of neighborhood tyranny that would live on in infamy. Life, finally, was normal again. Better than normal. It was peaceful, light, relaxed, and for the first time since I'd moved into the community, I felt like I truly belonged here. Saturday morning rolled in lazily with golden sun rays slipping between my blinds and birdsong trickling from the trees out back. I got up, stretched, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and wandered out to the porch barefoot. My lawn looked good, freshly cut the night before. No passive-aggressive notes on the mailbox. No code violations stuck under my doormat. Just the hum of quiet satisfaction. The absence of Karen had created something I hadn't expected. Unity. Tom, Melissa, the Nugents across the street. Even grumpy old Mr. Delaney 2 houses down, they all seemed more open now, friendlier, like something had been lifted. A silent pressure that once dictated how we walked, where we parked, and even when we sneezed, was finally gone. The HOA, interestingly, underwent changes to DOT. At the next monthly meeting, the board voted to install 2 new members, Melissa being one of them. Sheila remained president, but now with a clearer sense of balance. They introduced a neighbor-first policy. Grievances had to be addressed in person before being submitted in writing. If you had an issue with someone's lawn or their Christmas lights, or how long their kid's trampoline stayed up, you had to knock on their door and talk like adults. It was surprisingly effective. Without the threat of anonymous complaints or surveillance-level snitching, people got along better. The petty fights diminished. People stopped worrying that a garden gnome might be cause for citation. I smiled as I watered my porch plants that morning, the sun warming my neck. My mailbox had a new little magnet on it, a gift from Melissa. It read, "Early bird mows the lawn, but now with coffee." It made me chuckle every time I saw it. But the story didn't end just with Karen's departure or the HOA's reform. No, something else changed too, something in me. I'd always been someone who followed the rules, paid my dues, didn't rock the boat. And while that's not a bad way to live, I realized through all of this that sometimes you have to stand your ground. Because if you don't, people like Karen take root. They thrive in silence. They build power from your fear of confrontation. And before long, you find yourself asking permission to live on your own land. I decided I'd never let that happen again. 1 week later, a new neighbor moved into Karen's old house. A young couple, Lena and Jordan, fresh out of grad school, full of energy and smiles. They brought cookies to everyone on the block, including a gluten-free tray just for Mr. Delaney, their dog. A clumsy golden retriever named Bolt promptly dug 3 holes in their front yard and trotted over to my place with a shovel in his mouth. I liked them already. They asked me one evening, standing on the sidewalk, sipping lemonade, what the neighborhood was like. I considered my answer for a moment, then smiled. "It used to be a bit intense," I admitted, "but lately, it's been bright, real bright." Jordan grinned. "That's good to hear. We're hoping this is a fresh start for us." I nodded. "It will be. Just one tip, trash pickup is early Monday. The truck makes a bit of noise." Lena laughed. "That's fine. We're early risers." I grinned. The last bit of the old battle finally fading into a warm memory as the weeks turned into months. The community blossomed. Neighbors waved more. Kids rode their bikes past my porch again. I helped Jordan fix a leaky sprinkler head, and he lent me a ladder when I finally cleaned my gutters. Melissa organized a movie night in her backyard with a projector and lawn chairs, and for the first time in a long time, people actually stayed until the credits rolled. Eventually, the trash day joke faded into the background. Mike still honked once in a while, and we all chuckled, but the noise no longer carried tension. It had transformed from protest to tradition, a reminder of what we'd come through together. One evening in early fall, I sat outside as the sky turned lavender and gold, sipping cider and watching the breeze play through the trees. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Remember when Karen called the cops over your mower?" I laughed, texting back, "Now I mow while listening to smooth jazz. I think I'm evolving." She responded with a gif of a dancing lawn gnome, leaned back in my chair and stared up at the stars just beginning to peek through the dusk. Life wasn't perfect, but it felt right. And in a world that often seemed obsessed with control, noise, and drama, our little cul-de-sac had found peace. Again, funny what a lawnmower and a trash truck can teach you. You can follow the rules and still stand tall. You can be polite and still push back. You can love your community while refusing to be bullied into silence. And sometimes, Sometimes taking out the trash isn't just about garbage, it's about clearing space for something better to grow. Enjoyed the story? For more bold, real-life inspired stories like this one, like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Bright Reality. Truth isn't always quiet, but it's always powerful.